Hi everyone, my name is Morgan and I am the lead education aide here with Charleston County Parks. This is Nature in Your Neighborhood. Today, let's talk about tides. If you've ever gone to the beach or explored a tidal creek, you may have noticed how the water level changes. One minute you're relaxing on your towel next to the water at the beach, and later the water is suddenly super far away. So what is the movement of this water, and how does it happen? To understand why this water is moving, we first need to understand gravity. You may remember gravity from Sir Isaac Newton and the apple falling on his head. While I cannot confirm or deny the truth of this story, I can tell you what gravity is. Gravity is the invisible force that pulls objects with mass or energy towards each other. For example, the Earth's gravity pulls on you and me so we don't go drifting off into space. It can be a little weird to think about, but since we have mass, we also pull on the Earth. But since the Earth is much bigger than you or me, our pull on the Earth is much less noticeable than the pull Earth has on us. Not only does gravity help hold us onto Earth, but it also keeps the Earth in orbit around the Sun, and the Moon's orbit around the Earth. Without gravity, we would be drifting off into space without a clear path. Another force in determining gravitational pull is the distance between two objects. Objects that are closer will typically have a greater gravitational pull, regardless of their size. For example, although the Sun is larger than the Earth, because the Moon is closer to the Earth has a greater gravitational pull, and the Moon orbits the Earth. That can all sound a little bit confusing. Remember that gravity is the attraction of two objects, and those two objects exert gravitational pull on each other. So, while the Earth's gravitational pull is strong enough to keep the Moon orbiting around Earth, the Moon's gravity is also impacting Earth. We see the Moon's gravity in tides. Since the Moon is closer to the Earth than the Sun, the Moon's gravity is the main force behind the tides. The Moon pulls on Earth, causing the water closest to the Moon to bulge out on either side of the Earth. So, while we think of the tide as coming in and out, it's actually the Earth rotating on its axis that causes the tides. As the Earth rotates on its axis, it will turn into the bulge of water that the Moon has created. This causes the area of Earth that is under this bulging water to experience high tide. Part of the Earth that is not underneath this bulging water is experiencing low tide. It is important to note that not all water experiences this gravitational pull from the Moon the same way. Smaller bodies of water, such as rivers, lakes, and ponds, don't have enough mass to feel the gravitational pull from the Moon. This is why we mainly see tides in large bodies of water, such as the ocean and tidal creeks. Here in South Carolina, we have diurnal tides. This means we experience two highs and two lows in a 24-hour and 50-minute period. This is a little more than one complete rotation of the Earth on its axis, or one day. This 50 extra minutes means the time we will experience our high and low tides will change every day. So while on Monday, the two low tides for the day might be at 6:50 a.m., 6:52 p.m., the next day, on Tuesday, the low tides will occur later, at 7:44 a.m. and 7:50 p.m. In Charleston, our tidal range, meaning the average difference between low and high tides, is around 6 feet on average. But why do we have some tides where we have a higher high tide and a lower low tide? This is because of the Sun. As mentioned earlier, the Sun is further away from Earth, and the Moon is closer. Being further away means the Sun doesn't normally have a great influence on the tides like the Moon does, since the Moon is a lot closer. But when the Sun and the Moon align, the gravitational pull becomes a lot bigger. Imagine a game of tug-of-war. Because the Sun and the Moon are pulling in the same direction, the bulge of water increases, creating higher high tides and lower low tides. These tides are called spring tides. Here in the Low Country, you might have heard someone call an extra high tide a king tide. A king tide is a non-scientific term that is used to describe a high tide that is higher than normal. You can think of a king tide as a super high tide. So all king tides are spring tides, but not all spring tides are king tides. When the Sun is perpendicular, or at a 90-degree angle from the Moon, the Sun's smaller gravitational pull is fighting against the Moon's. Imagine that tug-of-war game again. Now, instead of the Sun and Moon pulling together on the same team, they are pulling against each other at that 90-degree angle. The Moon still has a greater gravitational pull on the Earth's water than the Sun, which is why we still have tides for that day. But because the Sun and the Moon are fighting against each other, we see less of a difference between high tide and low tide. When the difference between high tide and low tide is small, we call it a neap tide. Since the moon phases change based on its relative position to the sun, we can actually predict when we will have our spring tides and our neap tides based on the moon's phases. At full and new moon, the sun and the moon are aligned, causing our spring tides. At the first and third quarter moons, the sun and the moon are at that 90-degree angle, fighting against each other, causing our neap tides. Tides are a fascinating part of life along any coast, especially in Charleston. Keeping aware of what the tides are for the day are important anytime you are near water. You wouldn't want to get your stuff all wet from a rising tide or be stranded on a boat because the tide went out. We also want to be aware of tides when we're looking at weather. As you may have noticed, a spring tide paired with a large rain event can cause flooding in areas like downtown Charleston. Now that we've learned all about tides, take some time to check out a tide chart in your area. Can you figure out a good time to look for seashells and shark teeth at low tide? What about a high tide where it might be great to go kayaking in the tidal creeks? Can you think of any other tidally dependent activities that you might want to plan for using a tide chart? If you've been tuning in to Nature in Your Neighborhood for a while, you may remember our oyster or fiddler crab videos where we talk about how these animals are hidden as the tide comes in. Can you think of any other animals that live along our shores that are hidden at high tide? Thank you so much for tuning in to Nature in Your Neighborhood. We will see you again soon. Bye!